Welcome to episode 3 of the Justification Podcast. Today we're going to be delving deep into the fascinating world of Stoicism. Stoicism is a school of philosophy that developed in ancient Greece and Rome. Founded by Zeno of Citium around 300 BC, Stoics believed that the practice of virtue is enough to achieve eudaimonia, a well-lived, flourishing life. The Stoics identified the path to achieving it with a life spent practicing certain virtues in everyday life, such as courage or temperance and living in accordance with nature. The Stoics are especially known for teaching that virtue is the only good for human beings and that external things, such as health, wealth, and pleasure, are not good or bad in themselves, but they have value as material for virtue to act upon. So, external things are chances for you to act virtuously and lead a fulfilling life by being virtuous, which in turn means you are living in accordance with nature and achieving eudaimonia. To the Stoics, the point of philosophy was the application of the four virtues of Stoicism in practical ethics. It was a study of how to best live life. According to the Stoics, the universe is a chain of cause and effect, which they called logos. Rather than imagining an ideal society, the Stoics try their best to adjust themselves to our current society. They have realized that there are things out of our control and things in our control. Trying to take control of things that are out of our control isn't rational, and thus we end up suffering if we don't get the result we desire. In order to live our best life, we must apply the four cardinal virtues of Stoicism. There are, of course, other virtues, but these four are essentially the basis of Stoicism. First off, we have courage, which essentially means to do the right thing and face daily challenges with clarity and integrity. It is important to note that courage is the ability to act in situations where we feel fear. If it is not the absence or elimination of fear, it is practically the ability to act despite fear, despite being in danger. For the Stoics, courage is the ability to stand up to whatever challenges life throws at you without losing your principles. Regardless of how risky you might think it is, you must do what you believe is right and speak your mind. As Marcus Aurelius puts it, if it is not right, don't do it. If it is not true, don't say it. Next up, practical wisdom, which is often considered to be the primary virtue of which all the other cardinal virtues revolve around. Practical wisdom means using philosophy to understand and how to act and respond in all situations, good or bad, responding to complex situations with calmness and logic rather than allowing emotions to take over and forbid you from using your rational mind. A key concept in Stoicism, even the most important, was understanding what is within your control and what is not. There is always a gap between the outside stimulus and our internal response to it, and in that gap, we always have the freedom to choose and the power to act. That gap is essentially the time we have to choose whether to act virtuously or not. We can't control the external circumstances, but what we can control is how we respond to these external circumstances. Everything begins with separating what we can control from what we cannot, between what is truly important and what just simply isn't. It is nothing but dissatisfying, stressing, and in some cases dangerous to remain attached to external circumstances and external events that we cannot control. We suffer in trying to influence them, and thus our peace of mind is constantly disturbed with things that are not within our control. In life, our first job is this: to divide and distinguish things into two categories. Externals we cannot control, the choices I make with regard to them I do control. Third, we have justice, which means treating every human being, regardless of his or her gender, stature in life, and identity, with fairness and kindness. And last but not least, we have temperance, which means exercising moderation and self control in all aspects in life. It means to have the self discipline to do what's right and allow the mind to simply just do its job. As Marcus Aurelius cleverly puts it, we all know what we have to do, we just don't do it because our body has given us some reason not to. Self discipline and thus temperance is doing what you know you need to do despite what your body tells you. When you hear about Stoicism, you hear a lot about Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, but before we talk about them, I'd like to talk about Zeno of Citium. Despite Zeno being the founder of Stoicism and having written extensively and taught a lot in public places, he is hardly cited in modern Stoic literature. The reason for this is simple. None of his works have survived. You see, on a voyage from Phoenicia to Piraeus, his boat sank, along with all of his cargo. So because of this event that was completely out of Zeno's control, this very wealthy man suddenly became poor. What was his reaction? Acceptance and indifference. Zeno's ideas developed from the works of Socrates and other great philosophers of his time. He created and taught Stoicism often at public places. According to Zeno, although we do not have much control over what happens to us, we have control over how it affects us, and we must use this control to great effect. It is not the things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. For example, death is dreadful, but it's actually not. Your judgment of death is the dreadful thing. You can choose to see anything however you want it, and it will sooner or later become that. So instead of crying over spilled milk, Zeno maintained his composure over the situation, remaining calm and neutral despite his predicament. Zeno began teaching at Stoipoikal, which was located at the ancient Agora of Athens. Initially, his disciples were called Zenonians, but the name was dropped because the Stoics did not consider their founders to be perfectly wise, and they wanted to avoid the risk of the philosophy becoming a cult of personality. Since the Stoics gathered, discussed, and taught philosophy in a public place, their general philosophy was widely known. They believed that everyone and anyone can benefit from Stoicism, so they did not hide it behind the four walls of a school or a palace courtyard. As a result, everyone from slave to emperor could learn and become a Stoic, and they did. One of the most notable Stoic philosophers is Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor who ruled during what is called Pax Romania, which literally means Roman peace, from 161 to 180 AD. He is perhaps best known for his philosophical writings and is considered one of the most important figures in the Stoic philosophy tradition. Marcus was the emperor of Rome, which at the time meant he was the most powerful man to be alive. He had the option to indulge in whatever he wanted with no repercussions whatsoever, yet he did not. He chose to be good. Even under those limitless circumstances, Marcus Aurelius chose to be a good man every day for the 19-year period in which he ruled. He stared down the beast of limitlessness and indulgence. He said, "No, I choose virtue, not for the sake of praise or fame, just for the sake of being good." Despite having been the emperor of Rome, Marcus Aurelius became well known for his book Meditations. Meditations wasn't even supposed to be released or read by anyone but him. He wrote to himself for himself. It was for personal clarity and not public benefit. If you haven't guessed it by now, Meditations was his personal journal, which held his deepest confessions and beliefs. It is a book of short sayings, varying from a sentence or two to a long paragraph. It is not organized by theme, but certain ideas keep popping up throughout, indicating that he thought them the most important for him to understand and incorporate into the way he lives. There is no doubt that Marcus is one of history's most exemplary leaders and one worth emulating in our own lives. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, what does his book Meditations even preach? What were his notes? Now, I strongly advise you to read the book for yourself. However, for the sake of having some understanding of what he lived by, I'll be going over some key points that he makes. First one goes, don't you see the plants, the birds, the bees going around their individual tasks, putting the world in order as best as they can, and you're not willing to do your job as a human being? Why aren't you running to do what nature demands? Marcus Aurelius believed in living in accordance with nature, the natural order of the universe. Marcus Aurelius believed that a human was made to fulfill his potential. He didn't believe in accumulating things or riches or being awarded. Nature has created you, placed you on this earth, and your job is to be the kindest, most virtuous human that you can possibly be. This point is nicely summarized by a quote from Meditations. If it is not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it. In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Your rational mind is your greatest asset." Marcus knew that our ability to reason is what sets us apart from the animals, and it is the most important power that we have and that we must use to the fullest. Our rational minds have power over our opinions, and the mind can only experience suffering when it itself creates a desire for a specific outcome in life. Even Marcus, possibly the most powerful man of his time, said in a quote that nicely summarizes this: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." When you do realize that you cannot control outside events, you also realize that wishing for a certain outcome is foolish because it is not in your control and trying to control it is only going to generate suffering. Marcus teaches that our mind is the thing that controls itself completely and is separated from the world. It cannot be affected by events unless it makes itself be affected. So, when faced with external circumstances, and as absurd as this sounds, you can simply choose not to feel harmed, and you haven't been. The mind has this power to let or not to let something external affect it. In a stressful situation, you can either get lost in the sea of negative emotions and allow those negative emotions and the panicking of others to affect you, or you can let it all be external and rationally think of the best solution for all. How easy it is to repel and wipe away every impression which is troublesome or unsuitable and immediately be in all tranquility. Late in his reign, Marcus received news that an old friend and former general, Avidius Cassius, in an attempt to overthrow him, staged a rebellion and declared himself Caesar. Marcus's response was unusual because this man was threatening to take everything from him. He threatened his legacy, family, and even his life. So instead of immediately setting out to destroy the general, Marcus waited to give the defector a chance to come to his senses. When he did not, Marcus informed them of his plan to capture Cassius but not kill him. Instead, he would forgive a man who has wronged one, to remain a friend to one who has transgressed friendship, to continue being faithful to one who has broken faith. Marcus had controlled his perceptions. He wasn't angry, he didn't despise his enemy. With all of that in mind, Marcus Aurelius stresses that the evil that men do you harms your soul only if you do evil in return. Marcus reminded himself not to be upset by the misdeeds of others and to correct them if possible. If they didn't change, then just accept it. Marcus wanted to settle this affair well and show all mankind that there is a right way to deal even with civil wars, and he did. Moreover, he declined to prosecute any of the senators or governors who had endorsed or expressed support for the uprising. Marcus wrote, "To expect a bad person not to harm others is like expecting fig trees not to secrete juice, babies not to cry, horses not to neigh, the inevitable not to happen. What else could they do with that sort of character?" The question is, how will you let this affect you? When we do react to such people, we must not violate our own principles, nor should we be surprised by the wicked deeds of others. We should also stop wishing for men not to be prone to evil acts, because they are, and we are wishing for something that is not possible. Moreover, people do bad things out of ignorance of what is good and evil, and we should forgive them for their errors even when they harm us. This quote summarizes it nicely. It is a ridiculous thing for a man not to fly from his own badness, which is indeed possible, but to fly from other men's badness, which is impossible. Focus on yourself and on what you're doing. Keep an eye fixed on your own life. Marcus also reminds us that there is not enough time to waste on spying around on other people. It wasn't all fun and games. Under Marcus, Rome fought several wars, all of which concluded in a Roman victory. Marcus didn't have to deal with wars only, but also plagues. In the year 165 CE, a black wave of death washed over Rome. Epidemics were common in the ancient world, but the Antonine Plague was the first known pandemic of the Roman Empire. This plague almost destroyed the entire Roman Empire, an empire which armies could barely scathe. Not under Marcus Aurelius' ruling, though. The empire thrived. Marcus had managed to turn the worst thing that could possibly happen to the empire into something good. He made good come out of the worst case scenario. Marcus Aurelius is one of the best, if not the best, example of what a Stoic man is like or should be like. Marcus Aurelius was heavily inspired by Epictetus. The word Epictetus in Greek translates to acquired. Epictetus was born a slave with all of the cards stacked against him. You're probably wondering how a Roman emperor like Marcus Aurelius was inspired by Epictetus. Epictetus was a Greek philosopher. He was born into slavery and lived in Rome until his banishment. His techniques were written down and published by his pupil Arrian in his Discourses and Enchiridion. Epictetus taught various essential life lessons through his discourses and Enchiridion. The main point and the whole theme around Epictetus' teachings was his dichotomy of control. As written in the Enchiridion, some things are in our control and some are not. Focus only on what's under your control. The things in our control are free and unhindered. The things not under our control are not our own and are subject to hindrance. According to Epictetus, things in our control are our opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and in simple terms, whatever are our own actions. Things not under our control are our body, property, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. Now, you're probably wondering why we are making that distinction. Simply, because we must not aim or expect to avoid anything which falls outside of our immediate control. When you try to avoid things that are out of your control, you are bound to be miserable. When you try to avoid what's in your control, you'll fall into none of the things which you try to avoid. Avoiding something out of your control would be avoiding disease, death, misfortune, old age. You are chasing away at what is impossible. When you try to avoid bad things that are in your control, you'll be much happier. Now, when you are faced with an external impression, you should be able to look at it and say, you are an external impression. You are not what you appear to be. Because it is usually our minds over examining, over analyzing, and making the problem seem bigger than it is. So it is not what it actually appears to be. We are just afraid of our interpretation of it, not of the thing itself. Then we examine it to see whether it's in our control or not. If it's under your control, then prepare your answer. I'm gonna fix you. You're gonna be solved because you're in my control. I can control you. If it is not under your control, then you should prepare your answer. It is nothing to me. It is important to differentiate between what's under our control and what's under our influence. A very common mistake is that we tend to think that the things that are under our influence are under our control, only to be met with disappointment when things don't go our way. Epictetus teaches that it is not the external things themselves that harm us, but it is our judgment of them. When you are disturbed, you have no one but yourself to blame. Regardless of what another person has done or said, he hasn't really harmed you. Your judgment about the person's action is what harmed you. You allowed it to harm you. As ridiculous as this may sound, you can simply choose not to feel harmed, and you haven't been. Literally, nobody can harm you without your consent. Whenever you find yourself disturbed, ask yourself this: what is my judgment towards this? Then analyze it. Because the person who blames others is just uneducated. He cannot take responsibility for his judgment about the other person and thus continues to suffer because of his poor judgment. The person who blames himself is the person whose education has begun. He can see that he is at fault for carrying his poor judgment and thus takes full responsibility for it. According to Epictetus, the person that blames neither is the person whose education is complete. He can recognize that it is not the other person's fault because of his judgment towards the person. He can see that he is not at fault either because he has that judgment ready and on the go. Even though a poor judgment, it comes immediately without analysis or any rationality whatsoever. It is based on how he has been raised, on what he has been taught, and how he has been taught to react to such situations. So, this immediate judgment that he is usually not aware of, and thus it falls into the category of things outside of his control, so he is not to blame either. However, even though in this specific case neither are to blame, the individual can go on for the future to choose the judgment that he places on events. In the Enchiridion, Epictetus says, if you hear a raven croaking, for example, don't let the external impression take you away and say to yourself, this is not a warning for me, but it is a warning for my paltry body, estates, wife, and children. But for me, every potent is favorable if I so wish. It is in my power to derive benefit from it. As a very useful mental crutch, I suggest you do this. Epictetus suggests to have a goal of remaining tranquil, which means free from disturbance, for the entire day. For even when things go, quote, wrong, you can still succeed in your goal of remaining tranquil by just choosing to do so. Epictetus gives the example of taking the bath, where you have to be mentally prepared for the day before you go out. Think of all the people who are going to splash you, or rub against you. Be prepared to say, oh well, I wanted to take a peaceful bath, which is out of my control. It is subject to hindrance. But it didn't go well. I still have my goal of tranquility to attain. Then you just attain it by choosing to remain tranquil. We must just accept what happens. Epictetus summarizes this with a nice quote. He says, do not wish for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they should, and then you'll be serene. Epictetus contributed more than the dichotomy of control, however. His method of otherizing is phenomenal and grounds us into reality. When someone's wife or child dies, we are so quick to say, well, that's a part of life. But when one of our own loved one dies, it's all, oh, poor, poor me. We feel terrible when some misfortune befalls us and nothing when it befalls others. When your friend breaks his phone or loses it, you just say, buy a new one. When your friend's loved one dies, you think it is a human, so it must die. However, when the same misfortune befalls you, You are so prepared to react dramatically. What happened to the buy new phone? Or it's just a human, so it must die. Now, an effective exercise to counteract this is to acknowledge everything you have and be prepared to lose it all. Never say about something that you have lost it, it has been given back. Is your child dead? It has been given back. Is your wife dead? She has been given back. Is your farm gone? It has been given back. Even if it is a rascal who took it and stole it from you, why does it concern you who the giver chose to give it to? When something is in your possession, treat it the same way you treat something that is not in your possession. Epictetus also teaches that everything has two handles, one by which it can be carried and one by which it can't. In the Enchiridion, he gives the example of your brother doing you wrong. He says, if your brother mistreats you, you can revolt and be worse than him, thus mistreating him back. But that's the handle which it's not meant to be carried by. Or you can see him as your brother. You have been brought up together, and then you'll be laying hold of the matter by grabbing the handle of which it's ought to be carried by. In this example, your brother made a mistake. In Meditations, actually, Marcus Aurelius talks about this as well. He says, people make mistakes. When someone does you wrong, they have simply made a mistake. Think of how many mistakes you have made in life. This is to empathize with them and feel more compassion towards them. Moreover, Epictetus teaches that wealth is not the obtaining of riches. In fact, wealth is contentment. Through his quote, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Nothing you gain will bring you happiness unless you learn the art of contentment. He says, any man who does not think that what he has is more than ample is an unhappy man, even if he is the master of the whole world. In addition, Epictetus points out in the Enchiridion that you cannot expect people to view you the same way you view yourself. You have to accept how society views you and don't lie about it. Don't try to make yourself something that you are not because you'd be lying to yourself if you think you're more important or less important than you actually are. You usually know how they view you, and if you sincerely don't know them, ask them. Last but not least, when dealing with insults, respond to them with humor. Not taking the insulter seriously will deeply frustrate the insulter. Because of this alone, a humorous response to an insult is better than an insult back. Moreover, when you hear the word that someone is speaking ill behind your back, don't give the speaker much thought because they are talking behind your back for a reason. The things they said about you are the only things they see wrong with you, otherwise, they would have said them, so that's good. These are the only fundamental things that they see wrong with you. And third, it is out of your control what other people say. So recognize that and prepare your answer. You are nothing to me. So you see how all of these mental crutches that we learn from Stoicism can actually help us navigate through life with ease and total tranquility. Now that we have talked about Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, another familiar name that will pop into your head is Seneca. Seneca was a prominent Stoic philosopher, statesman, and playwright who lived approximately from 4 BC to 65 AD. He is known for his influential philosophical works and his known role as the advisor to the Roman Emperor Nero. Seneca's father was a wealthy man. He had his children tutored in philosophy. Early on, Seneca wasn't on track to become a philosopher. Instead, he wanted to become a lawyer, and in the beginning, things were not going that badly. They were going pretty well, actually. Unfortunately for Seneca, the going well part would be very short lived as he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and his diagnosis sent him all the way to Egypt because the climate there might be better for his health. It was then, through his letters, he says that fortune is not fair. We can't do anything about it except for choosing how to respond. This choosing how to respond and external and internal circumstances seems to be very common between these three philosophers, maybe because it just has some truth in it, and honestly, it just makes life easier. Seneca eventually returns to Rome, and despite having spent almost 10 years away from Rome and his political career as a whole, he manages to climb his way back to the top of the Roman political life. Things are going great now, until of course he was accused of adultery with the emperor's niece, which led to him being exiled for another 8 years. Things are not so great. Seneca does not take this exile well, and it is believed that this is when he started writing. When he is brought back to Rome, he is tasked with tutoring a young boy who is going to become emperor. Seneca tutors this boy in philosophy, and the boy becomes emperor. This boy's name is Nero, who goes on to become the worst emperor Rome has ever seen. He is remembered as a monster and a sadist with a chilling list of crimes to his name, from burning down his own capital city to sleeping with his own mother and murdering many of his close relatives. In the end, Nero turns on Seneca and he is exiled for good. It is actually when he does some of his most important work. He spends his last 3 years of his life completing his books. Towards the end of his life, he wrote, "My days have this one goal, as do my nights. This is my task, my study, to do away with old evils. Before I became old, I took care to live well, and in old age I can take care to die well." Now, Nero suspects that Seneca has conspired against him and puts his close friends and family to death, and eventually comes for Seneca himself. However, they demand his suicide. Now, Seneca has to meet his death bravely. He slits his wrists, but he's too old and lean for this. Then he takes poison, which does not work. So they opt for smothering him to death in the bath. He says evil drinks the largest of its own poison, and he knew that ultimately it was better to be him than to be Nero, even though he was the one dying. Two of the most prominent themes of Seneca's writings are death and time. If you're new to Seneca, I recommend starting off with On the Shortness of Life. It is one of my personal favorite works of Seneca. It discusses several key points, mostly about how we waste our life. In this book, he realizes that, quote, "It is not that we have short time to live, but that we waste much of it." In the book, Seneca points out some ways we all just waste our lives. Some are drunk most of the time, some are just idle, distracted all the time. Others are just spending time with people that add nothing to their life. If you look closely at humanity today, you'll realize that we still waste our time in the same ways today. According to Seneca, we waste so much of our time because we forget that it is limited and that we are all going to die. Seneca scolds, "You live as if you were destined to live forever. No thought of your frailty ever enters your head, of how much time has already gone by, yet you take no heed. You squander time as if you draw from a full and abundant supply, though all the while that day which you bestow on some other person or thing is perhaps your last." He also urges us to think about how little time is left for us. Seneca also scolds how much time has been lost to groundless anguish, foolish pleasure, greedy desires, and the charms of society. Seneca is also especially critical of the mindset of living your life when you retire. He scolds, "Are you not ashamed to keep for yourself only the remnants of your existence and to allocate the philosophical thought only at the portion of time which it can't be applied to any business?" So basically, life is not short. We waste a lot of it on useless endeavors that add nothing of value to our life. We are not ill provided, we are just wasteful of life. We can accomplish some of the greatest things with the life we have been given. In fact, Seneca argues that it's been given to us in generous measures by nature. If the whole of it is well invested, we can achieve the unimaginable. However, when life is squandered away through soft and careless living, when it is spent on no worthwhile pursuit, death takes us by surprise, and we notice that the life that we didn't notice passing has, in fact, passed away. I cannot recommend reading this book enough, even if you don't plan on becoming a Stoic yourself. This book is going to change your view on your daily activities, and it's going to influence a lot of your choices, and you'll find yourself more cautious of where your time is being spent. When you spend your time in places that you actually would like to spend it, you'll be much happier. There is no shortage of things that take away our time, and we must guard against them. To live this lesson, practice saying no to many of the time wasting things that you do, like trying to impress people or staring at a screen. How can we better pay attention to where our time goes? A very useful exercise is journaling. Log your day to day activities, no matter how big or small they are, and then slowly make that day log into something that you'd actually be happy to see. Seneca scolds, "You act as mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." We must keep in mind that death is coming for us all no matter what we do. So use that as fuel to live your best life. Another great and timeless book by Seneca was Letters from a Stoic. Everybody wants their life to matter and everybody wants to live a good life. In our quest to achieve these two goals, we often indulge in activities that bring us fleeting pleasure. Philosophy is the study of fundamental truth and wisdom. Because of that, Seneca believes that the study of philosophy can bring us lasting happiness because we will make better choices based on the rational mind. It won't be easy though. because pursuing growth and living in harmony with nature requires a lot of discipline and work. We must eliminate our bad habits and replace them with good ones. With wisdom and truth as our guides, we can follow the path of healthy choices. We can relinquish our fears and insecurities and become the best versions of ourselves. Letters from a Stoic is a collection of moral letters from famous Roman Stoic and philosopher Seneca sent to his friend Lucilius in order to help him become less emotional, more disciplined, and find the good life. We are going to be going over three of the most important lessons that this book has to teach, starting with on being enough. Unlike other philosophies where it is enough to only have food, shelter, and clothing, then learning how to be satisfied with those things, Stoicism preaches that moderation is key. We should not live in excess, and that function is more important than form. Seneca says that we should eat nourishing foods, but only to keep our bodies in good health and our stomachs full. We shouldn't indulge in fancy meals and stuff ourselves with food just because we can do that. We should have comfortable homes, not a shack, and sleep on the floor and such. We shouldn't concern ourselves with small things like furniture because that's purely decorative. It serves no purpose or no functional purpose whatsoever, as it is a waste of not only resources but energy that could have been put to much better use as well. This mindset is difficult to get out of. However, we must work on being satisfied with what we do have and take pleasure in the simple things. Be grateful for what you have, however, don't get too attached to it because whatever it is, it's going to go away someday. As for those who are craving more than what they need, more food, more water, comfort, they are entering into a cycle of dissatisfaction. In addition, we must also eliminate the fear of living without the extras. Many of us are afraid to lose our possessions, whether that be our phones, cars, or laptops. We are so afraid of losing them that they start to gain control over us. What you own ends up owning you. In order to avoid this, we must, of course, detach bit by bit and convince ourselves that we don't actually need the possessions in order to survive. We treat our possessions as if we cannot survive without them, which is mistreatment and fundamentally lying to ourselves. As Earl Nightingale puts it, the paradox is the reverse is true. Everything that's really worthwhile in life came to us free. Our minds, souls, bodies, dreams, hopes, ambitions, and intelligence. All of these priceless possessions came to us for free. But the things that cost us money, fancy cars, watches, are actually very cheap and can be replaced at any time. Finally, if we are miserable with ourselves, we will be miserable wherever we go. On top of being happy with the essentials, Seneca also focuses on developing our inner self. Seneca believes that developing the inner self is a lifelong process and that we must always work at it. Seneca insists that not having enough time is not a worthy excuse for not making time for our mental health. We can and should make time for our mental health. It is an important full time job, not something we shove to the side in favor of other tasks. Now that you're motivated to go on with this lifelong journey, where do we begin? Seneca's first step to improving the self would be to recognize our own flaws. Recognizing an addiction, for example, allows you to take responsibility, to change or deal with that weakness. In order to improve the self, we need to know what needs improvement. Ignoring your thoughts will obstruct any potential to improve and change. Another key to improving the inner self is to not compare ourselves to others. Seneca regards it as a waste of energy because why waste time comparing yourself to another person when you could be investing that time and energy in yourself? A good example of this is the comparison that happens at the gym. He has a bigger bicep, he has a wider shoulder, he has stronger legs, he can lift more than I can. Despite these statements being true, you need to recognize that the person you are comparing yourself to has probably put in more work than you have to get to this point. And in case he hasn't, in case it's purely genetic and luck, it is ultimately pointless to dwell on your weaknesses rather than to improve on them. Think of where you'd be had you invested the energy that you use up on dwelling into your self improvement journey. With this, don't dwell on dwelling too much because that defeats the whole point. Simply say to yourself, I have recognized my mistake. It is okay, and I forgive myself for it. You'll cultivate the awareness of it, and you'll recognize when you subconsciously compare yourself to other people. And when you catch yourself in that moment, think to yourself, what am I gaining from this? And immediately put it to a halt. Why be so concerned with others when you've outdone your own self? Set yourself a limit which you couldn't even exceed if you wanted to, and say goodbye to the last of those deceptive prizes, more precious to those who hope for them than those who have won them. If there were anything substantial in them, they would sooner or later bring a sense of fulfillment. As it is, they simply aggravate the thirst of those who swallow them. This goes both ways. If you're comparing yourself to someone who is weaker than you, you're not really any better off. In fact, you're worse off because the standard you hold yourself is going to be based on the person you're comparing yourself to. So you'll subconsciously start to do less and less, and you won't hold yourself accountable for your misdeeds. Moreover, bragging about this lifestyle not only defeats part of the essence of the lifestyle, as showing off to others is an external form of validation rather than inner. We should act quietly and allow our actions to speak for us. Be the person you want to be and allow your actions to speak for you. As important as it is to improve your physical health, your mental health is infinitely more important. This does not mean that you should not focus any of your energy on your body. Exercise, because getting into shape is not only good for your body but also good for your mindset and will generally make you feel good. However, as important as exercise is, Seneca argues that more energy should be put into cultivating our minds, whether that be through reading, journaling, or meditation. According to Seneca, the reason for this is that our body will eventually fail us and when we age and illness strikes, but enduring these eventualities is easier when we have strong minds. Last but not least, we should embrace the present moment. Even though examining our past and learning from our mistakes that we have made is crucial for avoiding the repetition of the same mistakes over and over again, we should live in the present as much as possible. Because for the past, as good as it is to learn from our mistakes or to look back on fond memories, dwelling over things we did in the past is a waste of energy, as it does you no good to cringe at your former self who has simply made a mistake. As for the future, worrying doesn't help. What will come. And the best thing you can do is fortify yourself and just know that in the present, you're always equipped with what you need in order to deal with what comes your way. Trust that you have what it takes to do good. However, dread does not serve us. It only prevents us from living in the present moment. When we find ourselves in such situations, Marcus Aurelius urges us to think this is not misfortune, but to bear it like a brave man is good fortune. Last but not least, on friendship. Throughout his letters, Seneca contemplates the meaning of friendship and how to make it ideal. Seneca also emphasizes that it is crucial to be your own friend as well because the person who does befriend himself will never be alone and is going to be a friend of all. Making a friend starts with the acknowledgement that we are not better than anyone due to our occupation or our predicament. Why? Because our position isn't permanent. It won't last forever, even though we might subconsciously think it will. According to Seneca, what makes someone better than another is purely the contents of his or her character, nothing more, nothing less. Secondly, we must judge who is worthy of being our friend. He also warns us of the dangers of cultivating mob mentality as their influence can be very destructive. Crowds can lead us to indulge in ways we may not on our own. A great example of this is being encouraged to down shot after shot, or to smoke, or to do drugs, or to cultivate a sex addiction through clubbing and one night stands. Most people smoke, for example, because they were peer pressured by their friends to do it, who they themselves have been peer pressured by their friends to smoke. Same thing goes with drinking and any addictive substance or habit. Crowds can lead us to losing control of ourselves, which Stoicism strongly discourages. With that said, we must not isolate ourselves from society. We can celebrate with others, and we must be determined to avoid indulgence in excess as well as to avoid becoming too involved in groupthink. You will be ridiculed, you will be made fun of a lot, not little, but a lot. But Seneca reminds us that the judgment of others don't matter as much as our own does. We must strive to live with virtue and integrity because at the end of the day, it is ourselves we must face. With that said, Seneca advises us that we must consider our potential friend's character. We should surround ourselves with people we seek to be like. As Dan Pena says, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Our environment affects us more than we'd like to admit, the places we go to and the people we spend our time with. With that, we must be more careful of who we consider a friend and who we choose to spend our time with. Is this person going to help me improve and grow, or is he or she going to negatively impact my life? While we can, of course, counsel those who are in a bad place, we should be wary of allowing them to come so close that we are affected by their negativity. However, we should avoid basing the friendship on how useful it is, even if it is useful to both parties. The primary reason for this is that once the usefulness has dried up, the friendship will likely fall apart. Make sure to avoid making friends with such people as well, because they won't stick around when you need them the most. Now that we have based our value and chosen our friend based on our values, the next step might be the hardest and the most uncomfortable, and it is to trust that person fully with everything we have. Trust breeds trust, and loyalty breeds loyalty. If you treat your friends with suspicion, they will likely betray you. You may bring about a self fulfilling prophecy. As Seneca says, but when you are looking at anyone as a friend, when you do not trust him as you trust yourself, you are making a grave mistake. You have failed to grasp sufficiently the full force of true friendship. So basically, you need to have this special trust with your friend and with everything you have. Seneca says, when friendship is settled, you must trust. Before friendship is formed, you must pass judgment. Ponder for a long time whether you shall admit a given person to your friendship. But when you have decided to admit him, welcome him with all your heart and soul. Speak boldly to him as boldly as you speak to yourself. We should trust the friend to the point where we would say things in front of him or her that we would only say between us and ourselves. However, you shouldn't go around trusting everyone, because it is equally faulty to trust everyone and to trust no one. Yet the former fault is, I should say, more ingenious, the latter more safe. Seneca claims that it is more innocent mistake to trust everyone, but he believes that neither extremes should be embraced, and that one should choose a path somewhere in between, not trusting everyone but not doubting all. So basically, choose your friends carefully and then commit entirely. A friend who you do not trust completely will become someone untrustworthy, and someone already untrustworthy should not be called a friend. Be careful not to trust everyone and not to trust no one. It is important to find a balance, because it is equally faulty to trust everyone and to trust no one, yet the former fault is, I should say, the more ingenious, the latter more safe. Keep that in mind. In like manner, you should rebuke these two kinds of men, both those who always lack repose and those who are always in repose, for the love of bustle is not industry, it is only the relentlessness of a haunted mind. A true repose does not consist of condemning all motion as merely vexation. That kind of repose is slackness and inertia. Some men shrink into dark corners to such a degree that they are seeing darkly by day. No, men should combine these tendencies, and he who reposes should act, and he who acts should take repose. Discuss the problem with nature, she will tell you that she has created both day and night. I would like to end this segment of Seneca with a few quotes that I found really interesting, but I just didn't have the chance to include them. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. This title quote reflects a point in all of our lives where we must consider only our objective selves. It is often our imagination, the voices in our head, that conducts these negative chatter and keeps us from being our right, just, and truthful self. As Seneca highlighted, we are in the habit of exaggerating or imagining or anticipating sorrow. In doing so, we put ourselves in a small mental disposition where it is disproportionate with what the situation we happen to be in truly is. We lose track of the present and we embellish the future with our fears and insecurities. Ignorance is the cause of fear. Ignorance is the root cause of anxiety we face when dealing with the unknown. It becomes difficult to rein in the horse of thoughts that wanders from one worry to another. We fear that what will happen to us is going to happen when we face an unknown situation in the future. People who are uninformed or uneducated are more resistant to change. And you can't improve yourself unless you change yourself to the better. So you'll have to take the dive into the sea of discomfort, because that's how you grow, through discomfort. Remember that. And last but not least, life is long only if you knew how to use it. Be aware of where your time is going. Ask yourself, is this how I want to live my life? Now, an exercise that I have come up with, and I think someone beat me to it, but I'm not sure. I call it habit replacement therapy. At the end of your day, log your days, everything. Don't be ashamed of how much you ate, or how much you binged YouTube, or how much time you spent doing another bad habit. Remember, you're doing this to prevent the bad habits, and you need to come to terms with your faults and admit them for this to work. Pick out the bad habits and ask yourself, what can I do instead of this? Then rewrite the day with the bad habits replaced. When you get the urge to binge YouTube, for example, go do the good habit you replaced it with, say meditation or journaling. Associate the urge to do the bad habit that you usually do with the good habit that you have replaced it with. Let's say, for example, when you say watch YouTube videos, you just binge YouTube videos. Instead of going to binge YouTube videos, go meditate or go journal. It takes time and practice, and it has helped me, and I hope it helps you. Now, before we delve into the misconceptions that people have about Stoicism, it is important to talk about the really important concepts that Stoicism has to offer. Number one, and honestly the most important one, is virtue. Stoics believe that the highest good in living a good life of moral virtue is through being virtuous. This mainly means that life presents you with opportunities to act virtuously, and the best thing you can do is act virtuously no matter how difficult it may be. There are a lot of virtues, but there are four pillar virtues which we have discussed before. Courage, which means doing the right thing and facing daily challenges with clarity and integrity. Justice, which means treating everybody equally with fairness and kindness, regardless of their stature in life, skin color, ethnicity, where the person is originally from, all that good stuff. Personal wisdom, practical wisdom, which means remaining calm under complex situations and acting rationally. It's more about proacting than reacting. And last but not least, we have temperance, which practically means discipline or self control. The most important aspect of temperance was again how to act in problematic situations or difficult ones. Primarily, this meant the ability to keep the emotions under control and act rightly regardless of what else is happening. Next up, apatheia, which translates to impassibility in English. It is often misunderstood as complete emotional detachment. It is more about achieving emotional equilibrium by not being controlled by irrational emotions like fear or anger. Apatheia refers to the state of being unmoved by the ups and downs of life, free from passions and emotions that arise from circumstances, both tragic and successful. Moreover, amor fati, which means the love of fate. Stoics encourage accepting the events of life, both good and bad, as necessary as a part of the natural order. Epictetus couldn't have put it better in the Enchiridion. Epictetus teaches us that we should just accept what happens. He says, "Do not wish for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they must, and then you'll be serene." The key is to remove the desire and aversion in regards to the things that are not in our control. Implementing this can be difficult because the mind tends to drift off into the future, so when we desire a certain outcome, the idea of not getting it makes us anxious. Epictetus also reminds us that everything that happens to us has been decided by the highest intelligence there is, and we should basically accept and trust the universe. In addition, Stoicism teaches us that we should live in accordance with nature, which means aligning our actions with the natural order of the universe. Living in accordance with nature in this context means accepting that all events that have occurred were forever fated to occur. This heavily ties into our previous point to wish for events to happen as they are instead of how you want them to happen. Next up, and perhaps the most important concept in the whole philosophy of Stoicism, the dichotomy of control. Throughout this whole episode, I have been saying under your control and not under your control. It is actually in the first chapter of the Enchiridion. If you're going to take only one thing out of this whole episode, it should be this, and I say this with absolute certainty, so I'll be taking my sweet time to explain it. Some things are in our control and some things are not. We must focus only on what is under our control, things that we directly control. This doesn't mean influence, but directly control. The same way you can directly control your hand to hold up two fingers or your legs to walk. The things that are under our control are free and unhindered. The things not under our control are subject to hindrance. For example, how you respond to emotions and feelings, how you respond to thoughts, how you respond to memories, how much action you take towards your goals, how much you focus on and engage in what you do, what you say, what you do to influence other people, how much you use values for motivation, whether or not you act like the sort of person you want to be. Comparatively, exploring things out of our control, that would include how other people treat you, other people's reactions, actions, feelings, beliefs, and thoughts, the passing of time, your physical needs, food, sleep, etc., the past, the future, and natural disasters or pandemics. The first step is aimed at recognizing and distinguishing whether you can channel your finite time and energy and can lead to relief in and of itself. Whenever you're faced with an external impression, a situation that is completely out of your control, you should be able to look at it in the face and just say, "You are an external impression and you're not what you appear to be." Then, once you are sure, you are completely sure that it is out of your control, prepare your answer and just say, "You are nothing to me." We should also not aim to avoid things out of our control. When you try to avoid things that are out of your control, you are bound to be miserable. Another important concept in Stoicism is impressions. Stoics explore how our initial impressions of events are often biased or incomplete, and it is important to subject them to rational scrutiny. We form our judgments and opinions based on what the Stoics called impressions. In broad terms, all stimuli are impressions. It is crucial to recognize that the things themselves are not what disturb us, but our interpretation and judgment impression of them. So when you are disturbed, don't blame anyone but yourself. There is also Seneca's view on time. As previously discussed, it is pretty clear, and Seneca emphasized the value of time and how we often waste it, encouraging us to use our own time wisely for self improvement. Life is not short, we just waste most of it. Moreover, memento mori, which translates to remember death. Remembering our mortality helps us prioritize what truly matters in life and avoid being consumed by trivial concerns. Keep memento mori in perspective. Keep death, exile, and all that is bad in mind, and you'll never have an abject thought. And last but not least, cosmopolitanism, which is the belief that all people are entitled to equal respect and consideration no matter what their citizenship status or other affiliations happen to be. Stoicism promotes a sense of unity with all humanity, emphasizing that we are all a part of one single rational and moral community. Stoicism offers practical exercises to help individuals cultivate resilience, self control, and wisdom. We're going to be highlighting some of the most important exercises that are actually just life changing. Starting off with a familiar one, journaling. Now, journaling gives you the time to reflect on everything going on in your life. Keeping a stoic journal is a powerful way to reflect on your thoughts, actions, and reactions. In your journal, you can record daily events and your responses to them, especially situations where you may have stayed away from Stoic principles. By regularly writing about your experiences and assessing them in the light of Stoic virtues, you gain self awareness and insight into your own character. This practice helps you identify areas for improvement and encourages you to live in accordance with Stoic principles. It is practically writing down your thoughts and feelings to understand them more clearly, and if you struggle with stress, discipline, or anxiety, keeping a journal can be actually a really great idea. It can help you gain control of your emotions and improve your mental health. Moving on, there is negative visualization. The core of this idea is to visualize negative outcomes in your life, and you contemplate what you have and visualize your life without them. Negative visualization makes you appreciate what you have, things that you often take for granted, like health, family opportunities, and youth. It helps with realizing that you are blessed and you have a lot to be thankful for, and you can easily put these in perspective. Moreover, perhaps the most important quality of negative visualization is that it helps you realize that the things you are afraid of happening are not as bad as you make them out to be. What if you lost your job? What if your partner left you? You'll find a way to adapt and move forward. However, the fear of the event actually occurring overshadows the fact that you'll probably be okay. So, negative visualization is crucial if you want to develop a greater appreciation for the things in your life, to make the most of the time you have with loved ones, and even prompt deliberate planning for when things go wrong so as to lessen the fear of the future. And last but not least, the view from above. The view from above exercise involves mentally distancing yourself from a situation and visualizing it as an external observer. Imagine looking down on yourself and the world and recognizing the smallness of your problem in the grand scheme of things. This exercise helps you gain perspective and reduce emotional reactions to everyday challenges. It encourages you to focus on what truly matters and avoid getting caught up in trivial matters. By detaching from the immediate emotional responses, you can make more rational decisions and maintain inner tranquility. We have discussed the virtues of Stoicism, and it's about time we talk about some of the most common misconceptions that people have about Stoicism. Nowadays, people may have varying perspectives based on their readings, experiences, and cultural contexts. Now, there are some common misconceptions or misunderstandings about Stoicism that people may hold. Number one is emotional suppression. Starting off with emotional suppression, people mistakenly believe that Stoicism advocates for suppressing emotions entirely. It is very clear why some people might think that, because when do people generally think of Stoics, they think of someone who cannot be broken, someone who shows no emotion, and they naturally come to the conclusion that the emotion is there but it is suppressed because the emotion cannot be there. In fact, Stoicism does not advocate for emotional suppression, but acknowledging and understanding emotions, but not being controlled by the irrational or destructive ones. It seeks emotional balance rather than emotional suppression. Stoics do acknowledge their emotions, but instead of allowing that emotion to take control of them, they just sit with it. The Stoics believe that we should only focus on things that are in our control, and the only things in our control in the vast cosmos is our mind and actions. The key here is to remain present and not let the emotion hinder us or cloud our judgment and actions. Second is indifference to everything. Stoicism is sometimes misinterpreted as advocating completely being indifferent to every external event or person. Even though Stoics do emphasize on focusing on what's in our control, they also acknowledge our responsibilities towards society. In the Enchiridion, Epictetus makes it a point to fulfill our societal roles through delving into the details of lessons like don't let people's bad behavior towards you affect how you treat them. We feel terrible when some misfortune befalls us and nothing when it befalls others, both of which teach compassion towards others. Moreover, Epictetus goes into detail on why we should be happy for other people's success, as they have paid the price somewhere along the line to achieve it, and he encourages us not to refuse to console someone who has made themselves sad. Moreover, in Meditations, Marcus Aurelius discourages returning harm, saying that people do bad things out of the ignorance of what is good and evil. We should forgive them for their errors even when they harm us and try to correct them if possible. He also stresses that the social animals, such as humans, are meant to live in harmony. However, with points like don't live to fulfill the expectations of others and do not sacrifice your principles to putatively aid your friendship and country, and we all love ourselves more than other people but care more about their opinion than our own, which discourages us from clinging to other people's perceptions of us. You can probably see why some might think that the Stoics are just indifferent. However, if you look closely, Stoics don't encourage us to avoid societal roles, but instead they discourage us from trying to control what is out of our control, because there is bound to be something that is out of our control, and it is going to bring us unwanted, unnecessary, and easily avoidable suffering. You can look at it as a form of protection. If it happened and you can't directly do anything about it, then why suffer in attempts of controlling it? Stoicism isn't about literally being indifferent, it is about not letting your emotions control you so that you have a clear head and you are able to rationally think of a solution that is going to benefit everyone, which is the biggest sign of caring imaginable. Third, apathy. Stoicism is not about apathy or a lack of caring. It is about caring deeply about the things that truly matter, such as living a virtuous life, while accepting that external circumstances are often beyond our control. Stoicism is completely the opposite. You do care, but you do care about the right and proper things. Just imagine someone who cares about everything all the time. Think of how much suffering they're going to have to endure because they care so much about the very small things, most of which they cannot control. Stoicism is not about apathy, it is largely about accepting the external world as it is and resisting the urge to point for a world that has not been, is not, and cannot be. The world will have its way. The Stoics are untroubled by the unfolding of events over which he has no direct control over. As Epictetus says in the Enchiridion, accept what happens. Do not wish for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they should. If you are still having a hard time accepting that things as they are, they're going to be as they are, this could help. Just know that whatever happens has been decided by the highest intelligence there is, and even if you don't see it now, it's probably for the better. Next up, we have passive acceptance. Some people think that Stoicism encourages passive acceptance of all events. This is largely true, but not fully true. Stoics do advocate acceptance, but it's an active acceptance rooted in rationality and the pursuit of virtue. This misses a crucial aspect of the philosophy that we should only accept things that we can't change. The lack of emotion is also a very big deal. Stoicism does not mean a lack of positive emotion like joy or love or even negative ones like sadness and hatred. The Stoic feels he is a human being. The Stoicism philosophy encourages experiencing these emotions in a rational and balanced way. Stoics also do believe in the importance of cultivating positive feelings, and a great way to do that is gratitude journaling. It is very shocking how much just writing down what you're grateful for can do for you. It is a domestication of your urges and impulses and knee jerk reactions. Stoicism is not the elimination of all emotion, it is the regulation of them. It allows us to process these negative emotions from negative experiences and turn them into thoughts that can give us a unique perspective of the world. Even though emotions are human and they are a sign of bad reasoning and could be overcome by getting a clear understanding of how life works. Last but not least, we have incompatibility with modern psychology. Critics sometimes argue that Stoicism contradicts modern psychology's emphasis on expressing and processing emotions. However, many principles of Stoicism, such as mindfulness and cognitive behavioral techniques, align with the modern therapeutic approaches. In summary, the quote wrong view on Stoicism arises from misunderstandings or misinterpretations of its core principles. Stoicism is a nuanced philosophy, and a deeper exploration of its techniques can help clarify these misconceptions and show that its principles can be valuable in a contemporary life. I saw this question on Quora and I couldn't just not include it. He asks, why is Stoicism toxic? Now, I do not believe that Stoicism is inherently toxic, but like any belief system or ideology, it can be misinterpreted and misapplied in ways that make it become toxic. The quote wrong view on Stoicism often arises from misunderstandings or misinterpretations of its core principles. You could consider this episode as an introduction to Stoicism. With that, our episode comes to an end. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the wisdom of Stoicism. Now, as we close this episode, remember to embrace the Stoic principles of virtue, wisdom, and resilience in your daily life. Remember that there are things you can control and things you cannot control. You'll be much happier. If you want a more detailed view of Stoicism, let me know by leaving a like and comment on what you'd like to know about Stoicism, and I'll be sure to tackle these topics in a future episode. If you found this episode valuable in any way, shape, or form, please subscribe and leave a like, leave a review perhaps. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.